170. Moral Force. Chalcedon Report number 80, April the 1st, 1972. The sustaining force behind all authority and power is moral force. When the moral force decays, the social order decays. Men are governed by brute force only when they are ready to believe in the ideas governing that force. More than a few men regard any reliance on moral force with cynicism. It was Stalin who said with contempt, "How many divisions has the Pope?" Guns alone spelled power to him. Many leftists, as well as conservatives nowadays, believe that force and brute power will govern men, and they alike despise religious faith as an evasion of the issues. Political pressure and military power are their essential trust. The New Left today, and such groups as the Weathermen, have a similar belief. Quote, direct action, end quote, really means that legal process and the battle of ideas are treated with contempt, and brute force is alone trusted to change things. In this, they are true sons of the current establishment, in that the political order relies increasingly on pressure, coercion, and direct action instead of ideas, due process, and legislation. Executive orders, a moratorium on legal process, and the bypassing of law constitute forms of direct action, as do bombs and assassination. Direct action techniques are admissions of moral bankruptcy. The old saying that the thing to do when you run out of ideas is to shout louder has more than a little truth to it. Stalin's direct action, as also Lenin's, was a result of moral bankruptcy. The Marxist dream called for the destruction of capitalism so that communism might flower. Instead, famine was the immediate result of collectivization. The greedy masses who had cooperated with revolution now found themselves the victims of it. Every kind of intellectual gymnastic was performed to rationalize the failure of the ideal order to materialize. War was declared against, quote, counter-revolution, end quote, and a bloodbath was stepped up, with the revolution devouring its own fathers and sons. By the time Stalin died, the belief in the Marxist hope was all but dead, and cynicism had replaced it. Anatoly Kuznetsov, in his foreword to Oktobriana and the Russian Underground, declares that hidden behind the official fine words, cynicism, both political and moral, has become the dominant feature of the average Soviet man, who no longer believes either in God or the devil, or Lenin, or communism, or in anything at all. His heart holds nothing but smouldering ruins. The result, as Kuznetsov points out, is a radical moral collapse among the people, in high places and low. Attempts to offer political salvation always lead to a decay of moral force, because the state cannot provide men with a faith for living, nor with moral character. The state itself must rely on the people for these things. The state is a mirror of the faith and hopes of the people, and it cannot generate in and of itself what its members lack. As a result, the religious and moral collapse of a people creates a crisis for the state. The moral emptiness of a people becomes the moral emptiness of the state. Most politics have become pragmatic and relativistic. Thus, in the United States, the solution to problems is increasingly based on such premises. As a result, its quote, best end quote answer is always to buy off the troublemaker. There is no belief in a harmony of interests. The reverse of this is a philosophy of a conflict of interests. This often appears in speeches, but, in practice, it is all too often neither the free market harmony of interests nor the Marxist conflict of interests which prevails. Rather, it is the philosophy of the bribe and payoff. Pay off foreign powers and give them what they want to win their support. Grant subsidies, favourable legislation and payoffs to minority groups, capital, labour, agriculture, college students, senior citizens, and every strong protesting group as a means of quieting protests. The answer is thus not a principle, but a payoff. In this, the state mirrors its people who are themselves unprincipled. Parents, quote, buy off, end quote, their children instead of disciplining them. Money is spent as a means of winning the child's love and allegiance. The methodology of Dr. Spock's baby care has become the politics of a nation. This is not new, of course. It has happened again and again in civilization. When nations lose their moral force, they substitute for it something else as a rationale for their civilization, because man in no age has been able to live by bread alone. Very commonly, such a decaying civilization, having lost all faith in moral absolutes, turns to a non-religious source for its justification. Aesthetics becomes a substitute for ethics, beauty the replacement for morality. The classic example of this, under the influence of Buddhism, was ancient China. In the 13th century, Japan also turned to ascetics for its faith. In such a culture, moral character is replaced by a subtle and refined appreciation for every nuance of beauty and taste. Men may be butchers and sadists, but they can talk learnedly of the finest details of aesthetics, the gourmet experiences, and of delicate variations of aesthetic taste. The Renaissance gives us many examples of such people. John Tiptoft, Earl of Worcester and Constable of England, earned the title of, quote, Butcher of England, end quote, in the 15th century. At the same time, he was a world traveller, a scholar, and a cultivated gentleman. He could weep over a torn manuscript, and yet view cruelty and murder coldly. Significantly, at the same time, the belief in sorcery and magic was strong. Men looked for power, and the occult thus attracted them. Since they sought unprincipled power, the occult was to their taste. Since aesthetics was concerned with good taste, not good morals, they could readily combine perversity and perversion with an emphasis on good taste. Aesthetics, however, when separated from ethics and theology, ceases to become a delight in beauty and becomes a refinement in bad taste, then perverted taste. Any analysis of avant-garde art, of pop art, primitivism, and every major movement of recent years makes clear very quickly that art is now a pursuit in large part of ugliness, but even more of shock and impact, an attempt at power through continually heightened perversity. Originally, this turning to the primitive had been based on a philosophy derived from Rousseau. It trusts in the primitive as the simple, virtuous, and healthy. As faith in the masses declined, this return to the primitive became perverse. It became a philosophy of negation, and art and politics became a negation of principle, law, morality, and, above all else, God. Alfred Jarry, in Ubu Enchaîné, had his actors appear on the field of Mars and say, "We are free men, and here is our corporal. Hurrah for liberty! 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 We are free! Never forget that our duty is to be free. Walk a little slower or we'll arrive on time. Liberty is never arriving on time. Never. Never. Let us have our liberty drill. Let's disobey all together. 1, 2, 3. You first. You second. You third. There's the difference. Every one of us marches in a different rhythm, even though it's more tiring. Let us disobey individually, our freeman's corporal. The corporal riots." Mehring commented on this. Collective disobedience under orders from the corporal of liberty in the riots camp, that would be total freedom for humanity, the freedom of all with respect to each. The next step after that kind of freedom was to press the muzzle of a revolver to one's temple, and that was the step Alfred Jarry took. Walter Mehring, The Lost Library, London, England, Sacker and Warburg, 1951, pages 94 and 95. The ascetics which develops in a world of relativism is an ascetics of destruction. In 1856, Walt Whitman gave the philosophy of an aesthetics of destruction in his poem Responde, declaring, Responde, responde. We must still go on with our affectations and sneaking. Let me bring this to a close. I pronounce openly for a new distribution of roles. Let that which stood in front go behind, and let that which was behind advance to the front and speak. Let murderers, thieves, bigots, fools, unclean persons offer new propositions. Let the old propositions be postponed. Let faces and theories be turned inside out. Let meaning be freely criminal, as well as results. Let us all, without missing one, be exposed in public, naked, monthly, at the peril of our lives. Let our bodies be freely handled and examined by whoever chooses. Let nothing but copies at second hand be permitted to exist upon the earth. Let the earth desert God, nor let there ever henceforth be mentioned the name of God. Let there be no God. Let the reformers descend from the stands where they are forever bawling. Let an idiot or an insane person appear on each of the stands. Let shadows be furnished with genitals. Let substances be deprived of their genitals. This description of total revolution is a description of our times. The aesthetics of violence believes in the cleansing power of violence and force. Thus, a culture which denies faith and moral force turns to aesthetics and finally a justification of violence as a new moral force. Violence, as the new moral force, is then directed against other men. Leon Trotsky, in Literature and Revolution, declared that our goal is the total recasting of man. This total recasting requires total coercion and total power, because man wants his world to change, not himself. Man wants the world to meet his needs, not he the standards or needs of the world. Man then becomes the subject of coercive action to recast him in terms of the state's plan for man. André Malraux, in Man's Fate, wrote that it is very rare for man to be able to endure his human condition. It is always necessary for men to intoxicate themselves. Marx said that men found refuge in the opium of religion. Malraux called it intoxication. As Mering sarcastically observed, it is obvious that so marvellously complicated a life factory as the modern state has become must naturally seize completely not only the means of production, but the means for intoxication as well. In terms of Malraux, man is deprived of his means of intoxication. In Whitman's language, he is stripped naked in order to be recast. In 1944, Werfel wrote, every one of us needs a reconnection, a religio, in its etymological sense, with an established entity. He saw the coming bankruptcy of modern man. Modern man is loath to accept the truth that certain creative forces in him are bankrupt, that this great loss has left him a shivering beggar in spite of his strenuously built-up physique. On the contrary, he believes himself to be the possessor of a promissory note on happiness, which one day will be redeemed when his political ersatz religion will have created the material prerequisites for it. Francis Werfel, Between Heaven and Earth, New York, New York. New York Philosophical Library, 1944, pages 9, 21 and 22. Men are now finding that they have no promissory note on happiness, and no political paradise around the corner of history. Instead, they are beginning to realize that their contempt of religious and moral force is leading them into the most fearful of all bondage, slavery to the state. Man has become the property of the state, the sheep of the state's pasture, kept for shearing and given no right of appeal against the supremacy of the state. By believing in nothing, man is becoming nothing. By granting creation no creator, and no direction, and no transcendental meaning, man has deprived himself of meaning. By denying God and the moral force of God's word, man has left himself a world in which apparently only brute force and coercion rule. But man cannot live by bread alone, and he cannot live under coercion alone. Man, having been created in God's image, requires meaning and purpose to live, and this meaning can only truly come from God. Virgil observed, "As intellectual beings, we can as little conceive meaninglessness as a square circle or a bent straight line. Without an overmeaning, that is, without world conception, world creation, world direction, the universe would be meaningless and therefore inconceivable." Page 126. The coercive world of statism is very much with us. It will become much worse before there is a change. The hollow men of humanism can protest, riot, and destroy, but they cannot supply that moral force which alone can restore meaning and direction to man in history. T.S. Eliot was right. The hollow men and their world can only end, and not with a bang, but a whimper. This is not so with men of faith. W. Haller, in The Rise of Puritanism, observed that men who have assurance that they are to inherit heaven have a way of presently taking possession of earth. Page 162. In one of his letters, Samuel Rutherford, 1600 to 1661, declared, "Duties are ours, events are the Lord's." Men who have God for their sovereign can neither believe that evil shall triumph, nor can they tolerate it. Their lives are governed by moral force, and they govern everything they can control with that same moral force. The world is full of wailing men who see the enormity of evil, but not the sovereignty of God over all things. It is impossible for man to triumph against God. The purpose of God is not the enthronement of evil, nor is it the counsel of the ungodly which shall prevail. The triumph of God and his cause is inescapable, and whether we see that triumph or not, we must never doubt that it will prevail. Samuel Rutherford wrote, "The thing which we mistake is the want of victory. We hold that to be the mark of one that hath no grace. Nay, say I, the want of fighting were a mark of no grace." All too many who call themselves Christian lack this mark. There is no fight in them as they face evils and troubles, only a long whine. In 1641, Hansard Knollys, in the midst of troubles and war, summoned men to struggle unremittingly for God's New Jerusalem and to beseech God concerning it. "It is the work of the day to give God no rest till he sets up Jerusalem as a praise of the whole world." This is religious conviction and moral force. Man was called to rule, not to be ruled, to have dominion, not to be a subject. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. Apart from God, this is impossible. Under God, man has a mandate to reconstruct all things, and the power of God to do it